The sound of a woman's muffled sobs cut through the dusty air of Silver Creek as Theodore Flint Everett stepped off his horse, his spurs jingling against the wooden boardwalk. A crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office on this sweltering July afternoon in 1876, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and judgment. Flint's hand instinctively moved to his holster as he approached, sensing trouble before he could even make out what was happening. $500 for each tear she sheds. The booming voice belonged to Jeremiah Blackstone, the wealthiest cattle baron in the territory. He stood on the steps of the sheriff's office, holding up a wanted poster with a woman's face drawn on it. Miss Thalia Graves has stolen something precious from me, and I want her found. The more she suffers, the more you'll be paid. Flint's jaw tightened as he pushed through the gathering. There in the center, surrounded by Blackstone's men, stood the woman from the poster. Her emerald eyes were rimmed with red, but she held her chin high despite the tears streaming down her face. Her hands were bound in front of her, and her once fine dress was torn and dusty from what appeared to be a struggle. "That's enough, Blackstone," Flint called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "A man who puts a price on a woman's tears has no honor." Blackstone turned, his face twisting into a sneer. "Stay out of this, Everett. This woman is a thief and a liar." "I took nothing that wasn't rightfully mine," Thalia spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite her tears. "My father's deed." A harsh slap from one of Blackstone's men silenced her, sending her stumbling backward. Something inside Flint snapped. Before anyone could react, he had his gun drawn and aimed at the man who'd struck her. "Touch her again," Flint said quietly, "and it'll be the last thing you do." The sheriff, a portly man named Bill Peterson who was deep in Blackstone's pocket, stepped forward. "Now, Flint, this ain't your business. Miss Graves here is wanted for theft." "If she's wanted, then arrest her properly," Flint replied, not lowering his weapon. "But there'll be no bounty on her suffering, not in this town." Flint stepped forward, placing himself between Thalia and Blackstone's men. He turned slightly toward her, his voice softening just enough for her to hear. "They put a price on your tears," he said, "but I'll give you love instead." The words surprised even him as they left his mouth. He'd meant to offer protection, safety, not his heart. Yet somehow, looking into those defiant green eyes, he knew he'd spoken true. Blackstone's laughter broke the tension. "Love, from a drifter like you, she'll be back in my custody before sundown, Everett." Flint holstered his gun and turned to address the crowd. "This woman deserves a fair trial, not a lynching. Anyone who tries to collect this so-called bounty answers to me." He cut the ropes binding Thalia's wrists and guided her toward his horse. "Come with me if you want to live through the night," he whispered. She hesitated only a moment before nodding, her face set with determination despite her tears. Flint helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. The crowd parted reluctantly, many eyeing the reward Blackstone had promised. "This isn't over, Everett," Blackstone called after them. "That woman's tears will fill buckets before I'm done." Flint spurred his horse forward, holding Thalia steady as they galloped out of town. He could feel her trembling against him, but she didn't make a sound as they rode hard toward the setting sun. After an hour of riding, when he was certain they weren't being followed, Flint slowed his horse to a walk. They had reached a small creek sheltered by cottonwood trees, a good place to rest and talk. "Thank you," Thalia said as he helped her down. Her voice was soft but no longer shaking. "You risked your life for a stranger," Flint shrugged, unsaddling his horse. "No decent man would stand by while a woman is treated that way." "There aren't many decent men in these parts," she replied, washing the dust from her face in the creek. "Especially not where Jeremiah Blackstone is concerned." Flint built a small fire, careful to keep it low so the smoke wouldn't give away their position. "Want to tell me what this is really about? What did you take from him?" Thalia straightened, her wet face glistening in the firelight. "A deed. My father's deed to the silver mine property. Blackstone claimed my father lost it to him in a poker game, but that's a lie. My father never gambled." "Samuel Graves was your father?" Flint asked, recognition dawning. "I heard he died in a mining accident last month." "That's what Blackstone wanted everyone to believe," Thalia said bitterly. "But my father was murdered because he discovered gold on his property." Real gold, not just the silver everyone knew about. Blackstone wanted it all. She pulled a folded paper from inside her bodice. This is the original deed with my father's name. Blackstone forged another, claiming the property was his. When I confronted him with proof, her voice faltered. He tried to silence you, Flint finished for her. Thalia nodded, brushing away a tear. He kept me locked in his house for days, trying to make me sign away my rights. When I refused, he decided to make a spectacle of me, hoping someone would bring me back to him broken and willing to sign. Flint handed her a tin cup of coffee. That's not going to happen. You don't know Blackstone. He owns half the territory. The sheriff, the judge, they're all in his pocket. I know enough about men like him, Flint said darkly. I was a Texas Ranger before I came here, saw plenty of men who thought their money put them above the law. Thalia studied him over the rim of her cup. Why did you leave the Rangers? A shadow crossed Flint's face. Lost my taste for badges after watching too many lawmen become the very thing they swore to fight against. They fell silent, the crackling fire and night sounds of the wilderness filling the space between them. Flint watched Thalia surreptitiously, noting the way she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances. Her honey blonde hair fell in tangled waves around her shoulders, and though her dress was torn and dirty, she wore it like a queen's gown. We'll head to my cabin tomorrow, Flint said finally. It's in the foothills, about a day's ride from here. You'll be safe there while we figure out what to do about Blackstone. I can't ask you to risk more for me, Thalia protested. The deed is proof enough. I should just take it to the territorial judge in Fort Smith. Fort Smith is a week's ride, and Blackstone's men will be watching every road and trail, Flint countered. Besides, you said yourself the judge might be in his pocket too. He spread a bedroll for her near the fire. Get some rest. I'll keep watch. Thalia hesitated, then nodded gratefully. As she settled onto the bedroll, she looked up at him. Why did you say that, about giving me love? Flint felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the fire. Just words to throw Blackstone off balance, he lied, not ready to examine the truth of what he'd felt in that moment. Her eyes, reflecting the firelight, seemed to see right through him, but she simply nodded. Good night, Mr. Everett. Flint, he corrected. Just Flint. A small smile touched her lips. Good night, Flint, he watched as she closed her eyes, her breathing eventually settling into the rhythm of sleep. Only then did he allow himself to truly look at her, to admit that something about Thalia Graves had reached past the walls he'd built around his heart since leaving Texas. Just words, he whispered to himself, but even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Dawn broke with a chorus of birdsong, rousing Thalia from a surprisingly deep sleep. She sat up, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous day came rushing back. Flint was already awake, tending to his horse. Sleep well? He asked, handing her a strip of jerky and an apple. Better than I expected, she admitted, accepting the simple breakfast gratefully. Any sign of pursuit? Flint shook his head. Not yet, but they'll be looking. We should move. They broke camp quickly and were soon riding again, Thalia seated behind Flint this time. She held onto his waist, acutely aware of the strength in his lean frame. The land around them grew more rugged as they headed into the foothills, pine forests replacing the open prairie. Tell me about your father, Flint said after they'd been riding in silence for some time. Thalia's arms tightened slightly around him. He was a good man. Came west after the war with nothing but hope and determination, found that silver deposit when everyone said he was crazy to keep looking. He built everything himself, never took a partner. And your mother? Died when I was 12, influenza. Her voice softened with the memory. I've been helping Pa run things ever since, keeping the books, managing the workers. Flint nodded. That's why you know the business well enough to realize what Blackstone was up to. Pa taught me everything. Said a woman should be able to stand on her own 2 feet in this world. Pride colored her voice. When he found the gold vein, he told only me, said we'd register it properly once he confirmed how far it extended. But Blackstone found out somehow. One of our workers must have talked. 3 days later, Pa was dead and Blackstone was claiming ownership. Anger replaced her sadness. I won't let him get away with it. They stopped at midday to rest the horse, sharing a simple meal of jerky and hardtack beside a bubbling spring. Thalia washed her face and hands, then attempted to tidy her hair with her fingers. "Here," Flint said, offering her a small comb from his saddlebag. "My sister insisted I carry this, said a man never knows when he might need to look presentable." Thalia accepted it with a smile. "Wise woman, your sister." "She was," Flint agreed, a hint of sadness in his voice. Thalia paused in her combing. "Was yellow fever 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," she said softly, understanding the pain of such loss. Flint nodded acknowledgement, then changed the subject. "We should reach my cabin by nightfall if we keep a good pace." They rode through the afternoon, the terrain growing steeper and more challenging. Flint pointed out landmarks and signs of wildlife, and Thalia found herself relaxing slightly despite their circumstances. There was something about his quiet confidence that made her feel safer than she had since her father's death. As the sun began to set, they crested a ridge, and Flint gestured to a small clearing ahead. A sturdy log cabin sat nestled against the hillside, a small corral beside it. "It's not much," Flint said as they approached, "but it's solid and hard to find if you don't know it's here." The cabin was indeed small but well built, with a stone fireplace at one end and simple furnishings. A bookshelf held a surprisingly large collection of books, and everything was neat and organized. "You live here alone?" Thalia asked, taking in the space. Flint nodded, lighting a lantern. "For the past 2 years, after my sister died, I needed somewhere quiet." He busied himself starting a fire in the fireplace while Thalia explored the single room. There was only one bed, she noted with a flush of awareness. "I'll sleep by the fire," Flint said, seeming to read her thoughts. "You take the bed." "I can't put you out of your own bed," she protested. "You're not putting me anywhere," he replied with a hint of a smile. "I'm offering." Thalia relented, too tired to argue further. While Flint tended to his horse, she used the basin of water he'd provided to wash as best she could, painfully aware of her bedraggled appearance. When he returned, Flint brought a bundle of clothing. "These were my sister's," he explained. "They might fit well enough until we can wash your dress." Thalia accepted the simple calico dress and undergarments gratefully. "Thank you for everything." Flint cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. "I'll wait outside while you change." Alone, Thalia changed quickly, relieved to be out of her filthy, torn dress. The borrowed clothing was a bit loose but clean and whole. When she opened the door to call Flint back in, she found him sitting on the porch steps, staring at the stars. "Feel better?" he asked, standing as she appeared. "Much," she admitted. "Your sister had good taste." Something flickered in his eyes, pain, memory, something else she couldn't quite name. Hannah believed in being practical but never saw any reason a woman shouldn't have pretty things too. Inside, Flint prepared a simple but filling meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. They ate in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Only after they'd finished did Flint broach the subject of their next steps. "Blackstone won't give up easily," he said, pouring them each another cup of coffee. "That deed is worth a fortune if the gold vein is as rich as your father thought." Thalia nodded, clutching her cup. "What do you suggest? I can't hide here forever." "We need allies," Flint said thoughtfully. "People Blackstone doesn't own. The U.S. Marshal in Fort Smith might help, but we'd need to reach him without getting caught." "There's also the bank in Tucson," Thalia added. "They financed my father's original claim. They'd have records that could prove the deed is legitimate." Flint considered this. Tucson's a hard ride, but fewer of Blackstone's men would be watching that direction. They talked late into the night, weighing options and risks. Flint found himself admiring Thalia's sharp mind and determination. She wasn't just a pretty face in distress, she understood the mining business, knew the legal aspects of claim ownership, and thought strategically. "You should get some sleep," he finally said, noticing her struggling to keep her eyes open. "We'll decide in the morning." Thalia nodded sleepily and moved to the bed, while Flint made himself comfortable on a bedroll near the fire. As she drifted off, Thalia found herself feeling strangely at peace, despite the danger hanging over her. There was something about Flint Everett that made her feel protected in a way she hadn't since her father died. In the darkness, Flint lay awake much longer, listening to her soft breathing. He'd meant what he said in town, though he hadn't intended to say it aloud. Something about Thalia called to him, awakening feelings he'd thought long buried. but he knew better than to act on such feelings. Once this was over, she'd return to her life and he to his solitude, or so he told himself as sleep finally claimed him. Morning brought the sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Flint was instantly awake, gun in hand, moving silently to the window. "Riders coming," he whispered to Thalia, who had also awakened at the noise. 4 of them. Thalia rose quickly, fear evident in her eyes. Blackstone's men. Flint watched the approaching riders carefully, then relaxed slightly. "No, it's Frank Tucker and his boys from the neighboring ranch. Friends," he added, seeing her concern. He stepped onto the porch as the riders approached, keeping his hand near his gun just in case. "Morning, Flint," called the lead rider, a weathered man in his 50s. "Sorry to disturb you so early." "What brings you up this way, Frank?" Flint asked, his tone casual but watchful. Frank dismounted, his expression grave. "Trouble. Blackstone's men are scouring the territory for a woman, offering a fortune for her capture." He glanced toward the cabin door where Thalia had appeared. "I see they've got reason to be looking so hard." "She's under my protection," Flint said firmly. Frank nodded. "Figured as much when I heard the description, that's why I came. Blackstone's hired every gun he can find. They're checking every homestead, every trail. It's only a matter of time before they think to look up this way." "How much time do you think we have?" Thalia asked, stepping fully onto the porch. "A day, maybe 2, Frank replied, tipping his hat to her. "Blackstone's offering $1,000 now, dead or alive." Flint's jaw tightened. "He's getting desperate." "Must be something mighty valuable at stake," Frank observed. Thalia explained briefly about the deed and her father's murder. Frank listened intently, his weathered face darkening with anger. "Samuel Graves was a good man," he said when she finished. "If Blackstone had him killed, he needs to hang for it. First, we need to prove it," Flint pointed out, "and keep Thalia alive long enough to testify." Frank rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "My sister Martha runs a dress shop in Tucson. She could hide you while you talk to the bank." Thalia's eyes lit up with hope. "You'd help us get to Tucson?" "Blackstone's been pushing small ranchers like me out of business for years," Frank said grimly. "It'd be my pleasure to help take him down a peg." They spent the morning planning. Frank and his sons would create a diversion to the north, leading Blackstone's men on a false trail, while Flint and Thalia headed south toward Tucson. They would travel at night when possible and stick to less used trails. "Take my wagon," Frank offered. "Less conspicuous than riding double and faster than walking if you lose your horse." By midday, they had loaded the wagon with supplies and concealed Thalia's deed in a false bottom Frank's son built into a crate. Flint hitched his horse to the wagon while Thalia changed back into her own dress, now washed and mended as best they could manage. As they prepared to leave, Frank pulled Flint aside. "Blackstone's not just after the deed, you know. Word is he offered to marry the Graves girl before all this blew up. She refused him flat, and he doesn't take rejection well." Flint glanced at Thalia, busy securing their supplies. "All the more reason to keep her away from him." Frank's keen eyes missed nothing. "You care for her." It wasn't a question, and Flint didn't bother denying it. "Known her 3 days, Frank. That's not enough time to go making declarations." "Some things don't need time," the older man replied with a knowing smile. "My Martha and I knew in an afternoon." Before Flint could respond, Thalia approached. "We're all set." They said their goodbyes, with Frank and his sons heading north to lay their false trail. Flint and Thalia set off southward, the wagon bumping along the rough trail as afternoon shadows lengthened across the land. They traveled in silence for a time, each lost in thought. The enormity of what they were attempting weighed heavily on them both. "Do you think it will work?" Thalia finally asked as they stopped to rest the horse at a small stream. Flint considered the question honestly. "It's our best chance. Blackstone can't have bought off everyone at the bank, and with the original deed and your testimony, we might convince the territorial judge to investigate your father's death." Thalia nodded, her expression resolute. "Then we'll make it work." They continued as the sun set, traveling by moonlight along the quiet trail. Flint found himself watching Thalia whenever he thought she wouldn't notice. The moonlight silvered her hair and softened her profile, but it was her determination and courage that truly captivated him. She had every right to be terrified, Yet she faced their dangerous journey with unwavering resolve. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, keeping the fire small. Over a simple dinner, Thalia asked about Flint's past, and to his own surprise, he found himself telling her about his years as a Texas Ranger, about the corruption he'd witnessed that had driven him to turn in his badge and seek solitude in the mountains. "You didn't stop believing in justice," she observed. "You just stopped believing in the system." Flint hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. "What about you? What were your plans before all this happened?" Thalia smiled wistfully. "I was going to help Pa expand the mine, maybe open a boarding house in town for the workers. Nothing grand. And now," her eyes met his across the fire, "now I just want justice for my father. After that, I don't know." Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a recognition of possibilities neither was ready to name. Flint broke the connection first, rising to check on the horse. They traveled for 3 more days, carefully avoiding main roads and settlements. On the afternoon of the 4th day, they crested a hill and saw Tucson spread out before them in the valley below. "We made it," Thalia breathed, relief evident in her voice. Flint remained cautious. "We're not safe yet. Blackstone might have men here too." They entered the town as dusk fell, heading directly for Martha Tucker's dress shop on the outskirts. Frank's sister, a robust woman with the same direct gaze as her brother, welcomed them warmly despite the risk. "Any enemy of Jeremiah Blackstone is a friend of mine," she declared, showing them to rooms above her shop. "That man tried to force me to sell my building last year, thought a woman alone would be easily intimidated. I take it he was mistaken," Flint said with a smile. Martha's laugh was rich and hearty. "Let's just say he doesn't come into my shop anymore." She provided them with fresh clothing and a hot meal, then helped them plan their approach to the bank the following day. Martha would accompany Thalia, presenting her as a cousin from back east, while Flint would watch for any of Blackstone's men. "The bank manager, Mr. Hollister, is an honest man," Martha assured them. "If your father's records are there, he'll find them." The next morning dawned clear and hot, typical for Tucson in August. Thalia dressed in clothes borrowed from Martha, a modest blue dress that complemented her eyes and tried to calm her nerves. Flint, dressed in clean clothes that made him look more like a businessman than a former ranger, checked his gun before tucking it into his waistband. "Remember, if anything seems wrong, we leave immediately. The deed isn't worth your life." "It's not just about the deed anymore," Thalia reminded him. "It's about justice for my father." Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Then, acting on impulse, Flint took her hand and pressed it gently. "Be careful," he said softly. "You too," she whispered back. Martha cleared her throat from the doorway. "If you two are done making eyes at each other, the bank opens in 20 minutes. Thalia blushed, but Flint just smiled and released her hand. They followed Martha downstairs and set their plan in motion. Flint left first, positioning himself across the street from the bank with a clear view of the approaches. Martha and Thalia followed 15 minutes later, entering the bank just as it opened for business. The bank manager, Mr. Hollister, was indeed helpful once Thalia explained her situation and presented the deed. He remembered Samuel Graves and expressed shock at learning of his death. "These records will certainly help your case," he said after checking the bank's files. "We have the original loan documents and surveys of the silver mine property, all with your father's signature. They match the deed you've brought." Thalia felt hope rising as the manager provided copies of the documents, certified with the bank's seal. "Will you testify if necessary?" she asked. "Of course," Hollister assured her. "The bank has no love for Blackstone's monopolistic practices. He's driven too many of our customers out of business." They were just preparing to leave when Flint appeared at the bank's door, his expression urgent. "Blackstone's men," he said quietly. "3 of them just rode into town." Martha took charge immediately. "Out the back door. My wagon is in the alley." They thanked Hollister hastily and slipped out through the bank's rear entrance. Martha's wagon was indeed waiting, with her shop boy at the reins. They climbed aboard quickly, Flint helping Thalia up before joining her on the seat. "Head for the South Road," Martha instructed the boy, "and don't spare the horses." They had barely cleared the town when shots rang out behind them. Flint pushed Thalia down, shielding her with his body as bullets whizzed overhead. "Keep going," he shouted to the boy, drawing his own gun and returning fire. The wagon careened around a bend in the road, momentarily hiding them from their pursuers. Ahead lay open country with little cover. "There's a ranch about 5 miles south," Martha's boy called over his shoulder. "Friends of Miss Martha's. Make for it," Flint decided, reloading his gun. He turned to Thalia, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" she nodded, clutching the precious documents. "I have everything we need." The pursuit continued for several tense miles, but Flint's accurate shooting kept Blackstone's men at a distance. Just when it seemed they might reach safety, one of the wagon wheels hit a rock and cracked, sending them lurching to a stop. "Run for those rocks," Flint ordered, pointing to a rocky outcropping about 100 yards away. "I'll hold them off." "I'm not leaving you," Thalia protested. "Go," Flint insisted. "Those documents are our only chance to bring Blackstone to justice. They're worth more than my life." Martha grabbed Thalia's arm. "He's right. Come on." With a last anguished look at Flint, Thalia allowed Martha to pull her toward the rocks. They had just reached cover when Blackstone's men caught up to the disabled wagon. Flint had positioned himself behind it, gun ready. "That's far enough," he called out. The 3 riders stopped, spreading out to flank the wagon. Flint recognized the lead man as Blackstone's foreman, a notorious gunman named Jace Miller. "Hand over the woman and the deed, Everett," Miller called. "Blackstone says he'll let you live if you cooperate." "Blackstone's word means nothing," Flint replied. "And the woman is under my protection," Miller laughed. "1 man against 3, those aren't good odds, Ranger." "Former Ranger," Flint corrected, then fired, hitting the man to Miller's right in the shoulder. The gunfight erupted in earnest then, bullets splintering the wagon as Flint ducked and returned fire. From her position in the rocks, Thalia watched in horror, powerless to help. Flint managed to wound another of the men, but Miller was closing in. Just as it seemed Flint would be overwhelmed, the thunder of hoofbeats approached from the direction of the ranch. A group of riders appeared, led by a man with a rifle. "That's far enough," the newcomer shouted. "This is Martinez's land, and you're trespassing?" Miller assessed the new threat's 6 armed ranch hands plus their boss and decided the odds had shifted too far against him. With a curse, he signaled his wounded men to retreat. "This isn't over, Everett," he called as they rode away. "Blackstone will have that deed," the ranch owner, Antonio Martinez, dismounted and approached Flint. "Martha's boy reached us just in time, it seems. Are you hurt?" Flint shook his head, holstering his gun. "Thanks to your timely arrival." Thalia rushed from the rocks, throwing herself into Flint's arms without thinking. "I thought they were going to kill you," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. Flint's arms closed around her automatically, holding her tight. "Takes more than Blackstone's hired guns to finish me," he said, but his voice was tender. Martha joined them, looking relieved. "Antonio, these are the friends I told you about. They need safe passage to Fort Smith to see the territorial judge." Martinez nodded. "My men and I will escort you to the territorial border. From there, I have friends who can see you safely to Fort Smith." With their wagon damaged beyond quick repair, they accepted Martinez's offer of fresh horses. By nightfall, they were miles away, camped in a hidden valley on Martinez's land. As they sat by the fire after dinner, Thalia showed Martinez the documents they'd secured from the bank. "With these and the original deed, we should be able to prove Blackstone's claim is fraudulent." "And if we can prove that," Flint added, "it opens the door to investigating Samuel Graves's death." Martinez studied the papers thoughtfully. "Blackstone has powerful friends, but evidence like this will be hard to ignore, especially with the bank manager willing to testify." Their conversation continued late into the evening, planning their journey to Fort Smith and the legal battle that would follow. One by one, the others retired until only Flint and Thalia remained by the dying fire. "Thank you," Thalia said softly, "for everything." Flint shook his head. "I haven't done anything special. You saved my life multiple times." Her eyes reflected the firelight as she looked at him. "Why? And don't say it's what any decent man would do." Flint was silent for a long moment, staring into the embers. "When I saw you there in Silver Creek with Blackstone putting a price on your tears, something broke loose in me. Something I thought was dead. He looked up at her then, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. I meant what I said that day. About giving you love instead. Thalia's breath caught. I thought that was just to distract Blackstone. So did I at first, Flint admitted, but it was true all the same. She moved closer to him, her hand finding his in the darkness. I've never met anyone like you, Flint Everett. Is that good or bad? He asked, a hint of humor in his voice. Good, she whispered, leaning toward him. Definitely good. Their kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened with the emotions they'd both been holding back. When they finally parted, Flint rested his forehead against hers. When this is over, he said softly, when you have your mind back and Blackstone is facing justice. What then? Thalia smiled, her hand coming up to touch his face. Then we see where this leads, together. The journey to Fort Smith took 2 weeks, with Martinez's men escorting them to the territorial border as promised, and friends of his taking them the rest of the way. They traveled carefully, avoiding main roads and settlements where Blackstone might have influence. The territorial judge, a stern man named Judge Harmon, listened carefully to their evidence and Thalia's testimony. The bank documents, combined with the original deed and letters from both Mr. Hollister and Antonio Martinez, were compelling. This is certainly enough to invalidate Blackstone's claim to the silver mine property, the judge declared after reviewing everything. As for the murder charge, I'm issuing a warrant for a full investigation into Samuel Graves's death. Thalia squeezed Flint's hand under the table, tears of relief filling her eyes. I'm also ordering federal marshals to escort you back to Silver Creek and protect Miss Graves until the investigation is complete, Judge Harmon continued. Mr. Blackstone will be required to stay away from the mine property until ownership is legally settled. It was more than they had dared hope for. As they left the courthouse, Thalia's face shone with vindication and hope. It's really happening, she said. Pa might finally get justice. Flint pulled her into his arms, heedless of who might see. You did it, Thalia. Your courage made this possible. The return to Silver Creek a week later caused quite a stir. With 2 federal marshals flanking them, Flint and Thalia rode directly to the sheriff's office, where Judge Harmon's orders were presented. Sheriff Peterson, seeing which way the wind was blowing, was suddenly cooperative. Just doing my job following the law, he insisted, though his nervous glances toward Blackstone's house told a different story. When Blackstone himself stormed into the office, rage contorting his features, the marshals stepped forward. Mr. Blackstone, you are ordered to stay at least 500 yards from Miss Graves and the silver mine property until this matter is resolved, the lead marshal stated firmly. This is outrageous, Blackstone spluttered. That mine is mine, fair and square. The territorial judge disagrees, Flint said calmly, and the evidence suggests otherwise. Blackstone's eyes narrowed as they fell on Thalia. You'll regret crossing me, girl, both of you will. The only one with regrets will be you, Thalia replied steadily. When you're hanging for my father's murder. Over the following weeks, the investigation into Samuel Graves's death proceeded. One of Blackstone's men, facing his own charges and hoping for leniency, confessed that Blackstone had ordered the accident that killed Samuel after learning about the gold discovery. With that testimony and the evidence of fraud regarding the deed, Jeremiah Blackstone was arrested and transported to Fort Smith to stand trial. His empire quickly crumbled as others came forward with their own stories of intimidation and corruption. Thalia, with the marshal's protection, returned to the silver mine and began the process of restoring operations. Flint stayed by her side, helping to hire trustworthy workers and implement the security measures needed to protect the valuable property. On a crisp October evening, they stood together on the porch of the mine office, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. The assayer confirmed Pa's discovery, Thalia said, leaning against Flint's shoulder. The gold vein is even richer than he thought. Flint nodded, his arm around her waist. You'll be one of the wealthiest women in the territory. Something in his tone made her turn to look at him. Does that bother you? He considered the question honestly. Not for the reasons you might think. You deserve every bit of success that comes your way." He paused. "I just wonder if a man like me, a drifter, a former lawman with nothing to his name but a small cabin and a horse, has any place in the life of a mine owner." Thalia took his face in her hands, her expression fierce. "Flint Everett, don't you dare. When those men put a price on my tears, you offered love instead. That's worth more than all the gold in these mountains." She kissed him then, putting all her heart into it. When they parted, Flint's doubts had visibly receded. "I love you, Thalia Graves," he said simply. "Have since that first day in Silver Creek, though I was too stubborn to admit it. And I love you," she replied, her smile radiant. "So the only question that matters is, will you marry me and help me run this mine?" Flint laughed, surprised by her directness. "Isn't the man supposed to do the asking? This is the New West," Thalia said with a mischievous smile, "and I'm a modern woman. Besides, I know what I want. And what's that?" he asked, drawing her closer. "You by my side always." His answer was another kiss, sealing a promise that had begun on a dusty street when he'd stepped between her and danger. 1 year later, the silver and gold mine was thriving under their joint management. The house they built overlooking the property combined Thalia's taste for comfort with Flint's preference for practicality. Blackstone had been convicted of murder and fraud, sentenced to hang but commuted to life imprisonment when he revealed other crimes and accomplices. On their first anniversary, Flint took Thalia back to his cabin in the mountains, now maintained as a retreat from the busy life of mine owners. As they sat on the porch watching stars appear in the velvet sky, Thalia rested her head on his shoulder. "Would you have ever spoken up if Blackstone hadn't put that bounty on my tears?" she asked. Flint considered the question, his arm tightening around her. "I'd like to think so, but I'm grateful I didn't have to find out." Thalia smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. "We have something new to be grateful for." Flint's eyes widened as her meaning registered. "You're certain?" She nodded, her smile luminous in the gathering darkness. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. Next spring, there will be 3 of us." Joy unlike anything he'd ever known filled Flint's heart as he drew his wife into his arms. From the darkest circumstances had come the greatest blessing of his life, a love worth more than all the gold in the West, and now a family to cherish. Under the vast canopy of stars, they held each other close, secure in the knowledge that while tears might come and go, the love they'd found would endure forever.